Mauricio Pochettino as the U.S. men's national team head coach is finally official. So let's talk about the big things he needs to do with this program to make it somewhat successful. Welcome to Campfire Football. I'm Sebastian North. Man, this story dragged on. You started to get a feeling like the Ancelotti to Brazil and then not situation might happen. The announcement kept getting delayed, and people started to wonder what's holding this up. Is he having second thoughts? But that's it. It's done. And the U.S. has finally locked up what is probably the biggest name manager they have ever had. So what does Mauricio Pochettino need to do with this U.S. program to be somewhat successful? Well, I've got 5 things that I think need to happen for them to have much of a chance. All right, area number 1 is sorting out your goalkeeper and your center back pairing. These are positions that are far from locked down at the moment. Matt Turner is currently the captain and the designated number 1, but there have been some subpar performances and some very poor mistakes as well that have made you wonder, is this really the guy? On top of that, he's not very good with his feet, and I imagine Mauricio Pochettino is going to want a team that can build out of the back using the goalkeeper. This makes you wonder, is Zach Steffen going to get a chance again? Now the back line. Look, with Robinson on the left and Dest on the right when he's back and fit, the flanks pick themselves. The big problem is central defense. Now, Tim Rima has done a terrific job in the last 2 years since being brought back into the side, but he's 36, and he'll be 38 at the next World Cup, and I just don't think that's the direction you really want to go. The problem is, who? Is it Mark McKenzie? Is it Cameron Carter-Vickers? Is it Aaron Long? Is it Walker Zimmerman? Chris Richards? Austin Trusty? The problem is not very many of these guys are really good at passing the ball out of defense. But like every player in this team, the candidates for these roles, they need to improve over the next 2 years or it's just not good enough. And that leads me to issue number 2, which is the requirements for selection. Quite frankly, Pochettino needs to pick guys who are playing for their clubs. They can be MLS players or they can be playing in like the Belgian league, that's fine, but it's not good to have a bunch of guys in your starting lineup who are not playing at club level. And you cannot have the U.S. national team camp just be some kind of safe haven for guys who are struggling in their clubs. This rule isn't like totally across the board. There are actually examples of players who are not playing much for their clubs, but do very well for the national team. Gareth Southgate had this with Harry Maguire, for instance. The point is, it shouldn't be what the majority of the starting lineup is doing. Gio Reyna, Matt Turner, Tyler Adams, Serginho Dest, Ricardo Pepi, Johnny Cardoso, all of these guys in the last 2 years have been in situations where they are not playing at all and they are starting for the national team. But going into major tournaments, you need guys who have been playing, who are ready to go, and who are going to be able to carry the pressure in those big moments in big games. I personally don't care what league players are in, as long as they are getting minutes and that they are somewhat of an integral part of that team. Weston McKennie is not incredible, but he has maintained a decent level by being at Juventus. Timothy Weah as well. Pulisic has actually raised his game since going to Milan and actually getting time where he wasn't at Chelsea. Zach Steffen left Man City, came back to MLS, and is actually having a quietly very good season with Colorado. Overall, Pochettino is gonna have to weigh in with a lot of these players to let them know if their career choices are going to help them for the national team or not. And I think that's actually going to help him reduce the pool a little bit and make it a little easier to make selections. So that's number 3, the size of the pool of players he picks from. Most national team coaches call on quite a few players in their tenure. Greg Berhalter, for instance, selected 91 players during his 5 years in charge, and he gave a first cap to 57 different guys. In all that, there were a few battles for some dual nationals that were won, and some of them are a very important part of this team, like Anthony Robinson, Timmy Weah, Yunus Musa, Serginho Dest, Fuller and Balogun, and then younger guys like Cade Cowell, Brandon Vasquez, Ricardo Pepi. So Greg widened out the pool in a lot of ways, and he did a pretty normal job of it. If you compare the amount of players that he brought into the side with other managers, it's not unreasonable. And let me just be clear here. This is not a golden generation. You can maybe make the claim that this is the most amount of talent the United States has had, but it's hard to be convinced about that considering the results they've had. And a lot of the criticism about how they've done has been down to their mentality. Basically, that they are a soft team who do not know how to rise to certain occasions and do not know how to play against different types of opponents. And that leads us to the next key, which is number 4, changing the mindset. It's kind of interesting how a lot of the players really rallied around Greg after he was let go for the whole Reyna affair. And then after he's let go the second time, they're like, yeah, we kind of do need a change of scenery. The thing that most USMNT fans have clocked over the last few years is that this team is just up and down with their performances. They are so inconsistent. And there are countless examples of this. Most recently in Copa America, they started with a flying victory against Bolivia in the first game, had a bad performance in the second, losing 2-1 to Panama, and then they had a sort of admirable 1-0 loss to Uruguay in what was actually a must-win match for them. Prior to the Copa America, they were beaten 5-1 by Colombia in a friendly, and then cleaned up their act a couple days later to draw against Brazil. But in other examples, they beat Trinidad and Tobago 3-0 in the Nations League before going to Trinidad and losing 2-1 when Serginho Dest had his meltdown and red card where he punted the ball in the stands. In October of last year, they were outclassed and beaten 3-1 by Germany, and then went and destroyed a very poor Ghana side 4-0. Even if you go back to the World Cup where they were all right, the first match they drew with Wales 1-1 after having controlled most of the game. They actually had a pretty valiant 0-0 draw with England, but then had a very tight 1-0 victory over Iran in a game that they completely controlled, but it still was really tight at the end. Then they lost 3-1 to the Netherlands in the knockout rounds and just looked naive, outclassed, and just not as good. The reality is, in the Greg Berhalter era, the United States only beat teams ranked above them in the FIFA rankings 6 times. 5 of those were against Mexico. The other one was Iran at the World Cup. So no big scalps in that entire 6 years. That has got to change, or the United States are just going to go out in the first round of the knockouts in 2026. The thing is that if Pochettino is going to be successful with the US, he is going to need to punch up and take down a few giants. They're going to need to consistently beat the smaller nations, especially in CONCACAF, and they're going to need to be intense and savvy enough to beat teams that are essentially better than them. To do this, Pochettino is probably going to need a pretty pragmatic approach to how he sets this team up tactically, which brings me to my final point. Number 5, the tactical setup of this team. International matches and tournaments are not won by playing scintillating football, where you build out from the back and create these beautiful passing moves with positional interchanges where everyone gets goals and it's a feast of beautiful football. No, a lot of it just comes down to being very solid defensively, having the right balance across the team, and being efficient in scoring goals off of set pieces and transitions. On top of that, you just need big players to step up in big moments, and Christian Pulisic kind of is the guy for that at the moment for the US. There's no one else who really does that, but at least there's one. So Pochettino is going to really have to dial into this team's strengths and weaknesses. If you take a look at the way Chelsea played last season under him, it took almost 6 months for things to actually start to click. Chelsea were giving up some awful goals in transition and were basically conceding chances every time the other team entered their half. Eventually things got better, but he had every single day on the training pitch. He will not have that at the international level, so he's going to need to come up with a plan that is simple, strong, that the players buy into, and that they can actually execute. We have seen time and time again how vulnerable this team is when they build out. This team is going to need to just be smart. If Matt Turner's in goal and you want to build out of the back, you cannot do it much through him. And though it's really important to have ball-playing center backs, you also need guys who are going to win balls in the air, defend in 1v1s properly, and know how to organize the rest of the guys around them. This is a delicate combination, and Pochettino's going to have his work cut out for him to figure out who exactly those people are. Now, how will he play? I mean, he did set up in a lot of the time in a 4-2-3-1 at Chelsea with 2 holding midfielders. But who are those for the United States? Well, there are options. You got Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, and Yunus Musa as the obvious ones. But is Pochettino going to get a little more creative and have one of them play more as an 8 that goes forward, and then you have a left back or right back come into midfield like he had Mark Cucurella doing at Chelsea? Possibly. Dest and Robinson are good enough with the ball at their feet, but they're also much more lethal running down the flanks because of their speed. So he has a lot of the tools. Don't forget about Gio Reyna as a possible 10. And do you stick Christian Pulisic out on the wing, or do you have him more central where he can dictate play? The good thing is he has an actual pool of guys who are experienced in this national team, but also young enough that he can mold them into what he wants. As I said, he's not going to have a whole lot of time to do that, considering the US does not have any qualification for this World Cup. It's just the Nations League and the Gold Cup. But tactically, if Pochettino decides he wants to go with a forward-thinking, aggressive 4-2-3-1 approach, he's going to need to make sure this team is solid in transition, which, if you ask Chelsea fans, was one of the biggest issues. So he has a lot to work out here, and it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see what Pochettino does. The interest that he has already drawn since he has come in is enormous, and I think a lot of people have to be excited with what US soccer has done with this. Now it's up to the manager to actually deliver. The next 2 years are going to fly by for this program. I'm telling you, before you know it, the World Cup in 2026 will be over and we'll be talking about the giant cross-continental one in 2030. So, can he take this program farther than they've ever been before? That's the hope. Only time will tell. We will see. Either way, I'm very excited for the October window when Pochettino finally takes the sideline. I hope you are too. We'll keep up with it. Thanks for stopping by. I'm Sebastian North. This is Campfire Football. Take it easy.